Kia ora, I'm Saya Wallach, CEO of Cooperative Business New Zealand. And as part of Cooperative Voices, we're exploring how co-ops and mutuals tell their story, not just in theory, but in ways that really resonate with their members, stakeholders, and the wider market. Today's conversation is about building that story from the ground up and how it becomes a driver of growth, connection, and impact. And I'm delighted to be joined by Carl Taylor, CEO of Combined Building Supplies. Welcome, Carl.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent, thank you. So thanks so much for agreeing to take part in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. Combined Building Supplies is definitely one of my poster children when people ask me about LinkedIn profile and engagement and co-ops. I always point them in your direction. So yeah, delighted to have you along today. We're going to start right back at the beginning for Combined Building Supplies and just wondered if you can take us through sort of what was happening in the market at that time that led to Combined Building Supplies being created.
Yeah, sure. So my story is I'm your typical builder, man in a van they used to call us. And so how how CBS came about was I didn't have the volume that a lot of the bigger players. So a few of us thought it would be fantastic if we could get together and basically combine our building buy power together, and thus then we'd be able to get better rates and compete with those big boys because it was a pretty dire situation 10 years ago, and that's kind of where this thing came about. So a few of us got together over a coffee and we thought, how do we get this thing to go? And to be honest with you, I didn't actually know what a cooperative was. I mean, I obviously knew Unlands was and those sorts of organisations, but there wasn't really a cooperative as such, apart from the merchant channel out there for us small guys. So we thought, shit, if we could get, five or six of us together, that might look quite good with our merchants. And so we did that. We got five or six of us builders together, went off to our merchant, asked for a better rate, and they pretty much told us to go away, which was quite disheartening, when you're trying to only just do good for your business, and the wider construction economy. And so I mentioned the problem to one of my colleagues who's still with us now, actually. And he said to me, look, the only way you'll get this to go, Carl, is to actually make it as a cooperative. And so we launched that. And if you ask me, will we do it again? We probably wouldn't because we didn't realize how much hard work, cost,
Mm,
money, and time was involved. Launched with 30 builders, 30 turned into 100, and now we're well north of 2,100 and half a dozen or so in Australia. And that's pretty much where we are now.
wow. So it's a 10-year journey to get from zero to 2100. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we've officially been going for 8 years, but it took us
8 years.
nearly 2 years to actually get the thing on the ground because
Mm,
as you would appreciate, there are four or five of us who put this thing together, and we all had full-time jobs as it was.
yeah.
So this was really just for no other reason to benefit our businesses. And so what became a part-time after hours job, a non-paying job, soon
Mm,
became a full-time job, and that's where we are now. So yeah, these things do take time. Yeah.
mm. So the issue that first brought those initial kind of five members together, that was purely to do with trying to get buying power in order to compete.
Absolutely. That's all we wanted to do was to combine our building power so that we could actually purchase um, for the same volume as the big guys and thus being able to get the same discounts. And it was all based around that. How can we get cheaper building materials? There was no other reason at all.
Mm,
And that's what we're doing now. And the
mm,
volumes are absolutely huge. We are one of the largest, if not the largest, purchasers of building materials now in New Zealand collectively
yeah,
as a group,
which
which
is
I
absolutely incredible. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into the storytelling that kind of got you to that place. So just thinking, so you talked about the first 2 years was actually really hard. You had a small number of people that were working behind the scenes to make it become real. What do you think kept you together, that tight five, I guess, that kind of kept you together in that really difficult initial phase? What was it, the glue that held you together?
I think for me, again, as I said at the start, I'm just your typical builder. So I know how to build houses and build them pretty well, but to put something together legally and knowing the correct channels was probably my challenge. So I think the answer to that was having the right people doing the right job. So we
Mm,
obviously had a lawyer who did a lot of the work for us pro bono, and that was creating, the disclosure statements because we are selling shares, so we are governed
yeah.
under the FMA, of course. So everything had to be well and truly above board.
Mm,
And of course, we had two other gentlemen there who had come from cooperative backgrounds as well. So they were probably the driving force in actually making it a cooperative. All I was
mm,
interested in was buying cheap building materials. So
yeah.
it was probably driven from that, having the right people in the right place to be able to build this thing. And
Mm,
had we not had that, I don't think we would have had it. And it also you get to a point in a journey where you kind of we had this thing which we called the no go zone. So we sort of had this date in mind and this number in mind that if we got to a point where we figured this thing was going to be too hard or too long, then maybe we should just scrap it and go back to our full-time
mm.
jobs. Um, but we just kept pushing through, and we passed that date and figured, well, now we're probably on to something. So we should probably carry on. Last 2 years of hard slogging was
Yeah.
going to be for no use and a waste of time.
So we sort of move on now to the kind of the evolution and the growth phase. So, you had that really strong sense of purpose that you described when you very first started. And has that sense of purpose changed at all or evolved as you've grown and you've moved from the kind of 5 to 2,100 members?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a good question because when we launched, we thought, it'd be great to get half a dozen builders together to help them. But what actually happened is we naturally found a couple of things. Firstly, we were getting other subcontractors, plasterers, plumbers, um, fencing contractors, those sorts of guys actually reach out to us and say, well, hey, can I join too? Because I put
Mm,
a whole lot of volume together as well. Um, so there was that. But the second thing that happened, and we never set out to actually do this, was the advocacy work. So all of a sudden, because of the volume of membership we had, we actually created a voice. And so because we weren't connected to any other organizations, it enabled us to sort of be quite loud and unbiased and kind of say things how we wanted to say it without any repercussions. So that's become a really good channel for us, particularly when it comes to government legislation reforms. And as you may or may not see, and I think you do, we're pretty vocal when it comes to what we see or what we believe is right or wrong for our industry. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, I certainly do see that. I see a number of press releases. I see the direct communication that you have with the minister, which is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, as you say, I think the the consistency of the way that you're, approaching the market, the way that you're talking about the market, the perspective that you bring on what's going on, particularly in the Canterbury area, with building, I definitely see that absolutely would help attract new members as well because they would see this activity going on and kind of feel related, that they're related to it. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And because probably the biggest thing I've loved about the co-op and of course, there's lots of buy groups in New Zealand. Buy groups aren't new, but a
Mm.
cooperative buy group is very new. So all of a sudden, you have these small operators, builders, plasterers, whatever you want to call them, whatever they are. All of a sudden, they own something.
Mm.
So what happens because they feel as if they own a slice of that industry, the bit that they actually get their income from, they tend to support it a hell of a lot more. And that's probably been the biggest thing that we've learned and the biggest thing that we've seen in creating this beast is just the support that you get from it from the members and shareholders.
When you're talking with your members, and obviously you're having to have a range of different conversations, probably one-to-one conversations, but also, I guess, digital conversations that are you telling the story kind of outwards. What, what are you thinking about when you're telling that cooperative story? no matter whether it's person to person or digital.
Our sales pitch is basically if you'd like to own a slice of your industry and you
Mm,
want cheaper building materials, you need to join us. And that's
yeah.
probably the main thing that we focus on, is letting that small guy own something that
Mm,
he hasn't had before. Because the small operators, and it's not just construction, it's actually the whole economy, business economy. The small guys just get left behind
mm.
simply because they're not big enough. They don't have the volume, and so on. So we just tell that story straight from the site basically, and it works out quite good.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so when it comes to, I guess, attracting new members, you've talked about the range of different, like you started off with builders and then you found plasterers were interested and, other trades were interested. What have you learned that actually resonates the most with these new members? Is it the price or is it the feeling of belonging?
Yeah, that's a good question too, and it's a really interesting one because we have members that join purely for the sake of being in something. So we do have members and shareholders that actually spend no money at all. They just feel as if this is a great thing for their industry, so they
Mm,
join for that. And then obviously we have the guys that own those small businesses that purely join for being able to benefit their business and make their business more profitable. And then obviously we have the members that are a little bit smaller, and they join because they just aren't getting listened to. So they come
mm.
through our channels for that as well. But what's really interesting out of this whole thing, and we never thought this would happen, is the amount of rural members we actually get as well. And we've got about 15 dairy farmers, which is quite small, but they join for the same reason because they actually build houses and they build and buy a lot of building materials as well.
Right. So on their own properties, are you
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely on their own properties.
right.
So that they'll join for that as well for our supply network. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So yeah, and you're right. I guess construction of sheds or where you need to house equipment, etc. on a farm. I hadn't really considered that rural aspect. So is that a reasonably
Yeah.
new pivot for you?
Yeah, it's been a market that we have considered at board level. And so we do sort of chase down that rural sector a little bit, but not too much. We
Mm.
certainly wouldn't say no to a member. What we look at is, if you buy building materials for your building related business, then you can be a shareholder of ours. And rural members or rural industry do buy a lot of building materials, so we certainly take
Mm.
them. Yeah.
And so thinking about the way that you tell your story to these different segments, do you tell the same story across all, or do you sort of split your members into
Yes,
segments and tell a different story?
no, we have exactly the same messaging throughout all of our marketing campaigns and
Hmm.
even in-house. And that's because we're all buying the same thing, so we don't need to change that messaging at all. What we don't do though is we don't get into things that we always, just talk about what we believe is correct in the industry. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And do you have to explain the cooperative model at all?
Yeah, we do and we don't. Like, we've got members that completely understand the cooperative model, and obviously there's merchants out there that are in cooperative, so they do understand what that is. We have had to shift a little bit of our marketing ever so slightly just around our messaging because I don't think everyone does understand what a cooperative is. So what we actually do is sometimes we'll refer them to a shareholder, but more so we're actually just referring to our shareholders as members because there is a little bit of confusion
Yeah.
out of the marketplace as to what that actually looks like.
Mm.
Um, so
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
how we
you're
do
right.
that.
And I guess there's different terminology as well. Fonterra refers to its members as farmer shareholders, and some refer to them as members. And if you're in a mutual, you might be a customer, or a policy holder. So
Yeah.
yeah, there is quite a different, I guess, terminology by industry really that relates to how you talk about the people that actually are part of your organisation and have that vote.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
Mm,
What does
mm.
happen though is we find word of mouth is absolutely probably the best marketing tool we have. And we do a lot on Facebook and Instagram and across all those social media platforms. In fact, we get 90% of our leads directly out of Facebook. So,
Really?
our
Wow.
well around that. But even better is that word of mouth. So when we analyze our sales at each end of month, we look at where did they come from, and obviously it's Facebook. But secondly, from that it's word of mouth. So whether or not Bob the builder down the road spoken to his mate, he tells us that, and then we know that we're telling that correct story. So
Mm,
generally everyone knows about us. It's just a matter of how do we get them all to join. That's probably the biggest piece of the puzzle for us.
mm. And so thinking about the way that that you might position combined building supplies compared to a competitor, like actually, who are your competitors that you see in the market?
Yeah, we again when we set this thing out, we didn't ever set out to compete with anyone, particularly with what we do. And as I said before, there's plenty of buy groups out there. But what happened, because we weren't aligned to anyone, we had a lot of the media and a lot of the government would come to us with comment on various topics. So all of a sudden, in the construction sector, we've obviously got master builders and certified in the sector as well, which are great
Mm.
organisations. I've been a member of both of them. But all of a sudden, I think they considered us as their competition.
Oh, I
Um,
see. Right.
what's happening
Mm.
is we were seeing a shift in people that would traditionally be a member of another organisation, and they might be paying $4,000 or $5,000 to join, and maybe they were thinking they weren't quite getting value, so they'd see us, and for $1,000 for shareholding, it appeared to be a better offering.
Mm.
So we were very careful not to sort of stir too much of the pot on that one, but that's just kind of what happened. Again, there's plenty of buy groups out there, but I don't think there's anyone that's actually a cooperative doing it. Question, I don't
Mm.
think we've actually got any competition as such. But we don't look at the market like that. We kind of
Hmm.
ignore our competitors, if you want to call them that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Focus on the value that the that being a cooperative brings
Yep.
to the building sector,
And
really.
and so one of the things we put into the brains of our team is we say to them, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you want to think about is how do I serve my shareholder and how do I get the best deal for him? That's the biggest thing we teach our team.
Mm.
And when they wake up and think of that, we know that we can go out and negotiate the best rates. We know that we can help them open up accounts with the suppliers, and we know that they'll support our suppliers and spend money and thus create revenue for them when we do
Mm.
our share payouts at the end of each year.
Mm. So that's okay. So they can directly see that value coming back immediately.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
absolutely. I mean, when you get a small builder who builds one or two houses a year, he's a great business, but he doesn't get looked after, and he hasn't been looked after for 20 odd years. All of a sudden, we're writing him a check for a couple of $100 just to say, "Hey, thank you, thanks for spending with your cooperative." In
Mm.
fact, last year we paid back over $350,000 to our
Wow.
shareholders. And that was split out between about 1,000 qualifying shareholders. So for
Mm.
them to get something back just for operating their business can only be a good thing.
Yeah. 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 It almost sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? But it's true.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I know when I go in and listen to some of our sales calls, some of the comments are that the person on the other side of the phone says, "Geez, this sounds too good to be true," but it actually is.
Yeah.
Really, really is.
Yeah.
It's absolutely real, and there is no catches whatsoever.
Mm. I mean, and from my perspective as in the industry body, that is one of the core benefits of the cooperative and mutual model is the fact that value is recycled back into the community and it stays within the community and it stays within New Zealand. It does not drift offshore. It's actually retained here. And that's some of the magic, I guess, the secret sauce of co-ops and mutuals compared to a regular investor-owned or private company. Definitely. So that's part of the story that I
Yeah,
tell, as the industry body. So
yeah.
just thinking about, the conversation that you've had around sort of external engagement and the fact that people were coming to you for commentary about what's going on, how important do you think that external profile, I guess, outside of just your members, has helped you as a cooperative to grow?
Yeah, this cooperative model for us has opened up doors that I would never imagine to be able to get in front of. For example, we're quite often talking to Minister Pink over the construction sector issues,
Mm.
and we think that's great that we can actually do that. Again, our I always say, the guys that we have, ones that are actually building the construction sector in New Zealand, as opposed to the group supermarket builders. So we actually have the guys that are building. So to be able to get in front of the government and actually tell them what the coalface workers are seeing, hearing, and doing is probably the most important thing that we could do for our members. We do pick and choose those topics, but we
Yeah,
generally
of course.
go
Yeah.
most of them. In
Mm.
fact, the most important topic at the moment is the mandatory warranties, which is a great scheme, but we are doing some work around that as well at the
Mm.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So advocacy is a core, really important part of what you do on behalf of your members as a
Yeah,
co-op. Mm.
it's a huge thing that we do for our members, just because the small guy doesn't get seen or heard otherwise.
And so, so we're moving on now to your expansion. So not only have you grown rapidly the members of the cooperative here in New Zealand, you've also taken it offshore to across the Tasman to Australia. But I understand that you've chosen not to do a co-op model in Australia. So just curious if you can tell us a little bit about that thought process and why that happened.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good question too. So the reason why we didn't go down the cooperative model as such in Australia was just simply because it was far too complicated, and far too expensive for us to put together. Plus, the cooperative rules over there, with their governing bodies are a lot more complex than ours here. So what we do here is quite simple. So what we've done instead is just made it simply just a buy group, but it benefits the members here in New Zealand. So although we've just launched there, again, that was almost 2 years in the making as well. And I would have loved to go down the cooperative route, but to put that into perspective, I'd need different disclosure documents almost for every single state in Australia. So
I
we've
see.
just decided just to concentrate on that southeast Queensland. It's nice and easy there. It's cheap to get to because the flights are easy, and quite frankly, the beaches are better there as well. So it's a bit more attractive. It's a bit more attractive to go there. And probably the
Mm.
other thing where we've decided to launch in Brisbane is that there's a huge amount of Kiwis living in there that know about us. So that's really
I
easy
see.
for us to
Right.
market. Yeah. Every second
Mm.
builder over there is a Kiwi. So it's really easy to tell the story as well. Yeah.
So you said that the Australian part of combined building supplies benefits the New Zealand part. So what do you mean when you say that?
Just for advantage of scale. So
I
if we
see.
talked about our biggest merchant being Bunnings, we spend excess 35 million a year just with them alone.
Mm.
When we start spending quite a lot more in Australia, that gives us more negotiation power
Mm.
for our New Zealand shareholders.
Yeah.
And of course, rebate that gets in benefits the New Zealand shareholder. So that's how
Mm.
that works. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So even though the story of the entity itself, the cooperative story resides within New Zealand and the buying group story resides in Australia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Our,
Yeah.
our members in Australia get the same benefit as they do as a member in New Zealand. Other than that, they don't qualify for a rebate, and that's something we just can't do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they do benefit by the volume
Hmm.
that we purchase here in New Zealand, and of course, the New Zealand shareholders benefit because we are spending more with our merchants, and that gives us a whole lot more power when it comes to negotiating at the table every couple of years when our contracts are up for renewal for supply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Amazing.
the small businesses in Australia, or the small tradies in Australia, have exactly the same problem as we do here in New Zealand. And simply they just can't compete because they're not big enough. There's
Mm.
problems. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So for other co-ops in the room or other co-ops listening, what have you learned about building and communicating a cooperative story that others could apply?
I think probably the biggest thing I've learned for other members is these things take time. A cooperative generally, I mean, I always say this, cooperatives last forever. And I always use the story of SBS Bank. I mean, they're what, 150 years old? So I always say to people, look, if you're creating a cooperative, you are doing this for life. Theoretically, this thing should be here for 100, 150, 200 years. There's no reason why it won't last. So there's that benefit as well in terms of creating a cooperative, having the right people in the right place and having the right vision, particularly from the board. It's really important that your board members have the same vision as what you do so you can actually create what it is that you're trying to create in the industry to
Mm,
serve your members or shareholders or whatever they might be. Yeah.
mm, yeah. And again, as an industry body, that is one of the key benefits that we talk about as well for cooperatives and mutuals is the perspective of the organisation is intergenerational by default. So
Yeah.
that means that your thought processes around sustainability or succession planning or engagement with your community, those those thought processes are actually baked into the way that the organization operates and the way that the organization's built. So yeah, totally agree with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, cooperatives aren't designed to recreate or reinvent the wheel. They're not there
Mm,
for that. They're just there to help everyone collect get whatever it is you're doing, whether it be business, whether it be a community cooperative. Cooperatives aren't just in business, as we know, they're
mm,
across everything. So
mm.
they really help keep things together for a lot longer and keep
Yeah,
them going forever, as far as I'm concerned.
no, it's a great way to end. So yeah, so thank you so much, Carl. I've really appreciated the conversation. It's been fantastic. And as I said, Combined Building Supplies is my poster child, I guess, for visually telling the co-op story and telling it so consistently across different channels. So, what's really come through for me is that the co-op story isn't something that you write once. And as you said, it takes a long time of consistency telling that story. And actually bringing it into practice through advocacy, as you've mentioned, is a really important element for it. So, for many people that are listening or those that are watching, the takeaway could be this that when the cooperative model is really clearly understood and consistently demonstrated, it's a powerful driver of both growth and member loyalty. So, thanks once again, Carl. Really appreciate your time.
No problems. Thank you for the opportunity.